This episode of Influence is supported by Zencastr. It's the online platform for podcasting that I use to make all my podcasts and my clients' podcasts when applicable. Here's the thing. There's no software to download. You don't have to download an app or send someone a sketchy, exe file. You just use it in a web browser. You send your guest or your co-host a link. They're in, and here's the best part. It records and captures and uploads the audio directly from your microphone or your webcam. It's not going to sound like a Zoom call where it's all this echo cancellation and VoIP, like, no, it sounds like professional audio because it's coming right from your microphone. Every participant gets their own track, which I love, so it really helps you with the edit later. Or if the podcast went great, no editing, you want to just mush them all together and hit publish, you can do that too with the mix, okay? There's a soundboard. You can add custom sounds to your session like this. Just hit the button and it goes right into its own track. That's a lot of fun. Also, let me tell you, if I haven't convinced you already, this is like the big reason why I've been using Zencastr for like 4 to 5 years now to make all the shows. Post-production tools. Sometimes your guests have they got a noisy room or they've got a laptop mic and it's not the greatest. The post-production tools can reduce noise. They can level out the audio so your guest audio track and your audio track and your co-host audio track are all at the same volume. The quiet whispering when people are like not talking into the microphone, and also the loud they all get normalized to the same volume so that your podcast sounds professional, crisp, and it does it automatically, saving you time when you edit your show. If you're starting your own podcast, or you're coming from another tool, or you're rebooting a show, or you just want to experiment and see what remote podcasting is all about, check the link in the description of this YouTube video or in the show notes of the audio version, whatever podcast platform you are enjoying this fine program on. To get a 14-day free trial, you can try Zencastr for 2 weeks without paying anything. And if you use the link in the show notes in the description, then you are helping to support this program. If you have questions about Zencastr, if you try the 2-week free trial, you're like, how do I do this? Where's this button? Shoot me an email. Hop into the Discord. I guarantee I can answer that question. Also, their support is top-notch. I talk with them every 2 weeks, every month. I'm like, hey, what about this? They're like, we should do that. Things that I wish I had on Zencastr to help me produce my podcasts more efficiently, more effective. I have said, hey, what about this? And they have added it to the platform. That's how responsive and supportive they are. Thank you to Zencastr for supporting Influence. Again, a 14-day free trial. Check the link in the description to start your remote podcasting journey with Zencastr. This week on Influence, only good news. Mostly. Hello there, friends and neighbors. Welcome back to a piping hot, fresh episode of Influence. My name is Matt Silverman. It's the show where we talk about internet creativity, the people who are hopefully living the dream and doing the things that they love on the internet, making content, newsletters, YouTube videos, Instagram reels, TikToks, I don't know, cool dances on the whatever. If it's creative, if it's interesting, if it's informative, if it matters to people, often thousands, perhaps millions, perhaps billions with a B of people on the internet, then they are welcome here. You are welcome here. Thank you so much for listening and or watching on the YouTube channel. I've got a great one for you. I'm so excited to talk to my guest this week because if you've been using the internet for any length of time, you probably notice that you scroll, you look, and you're like, oh, well, this person, oh, this is cool. And then I would say 3 to 4 posts down, you just start feeling sad or anxious. You're like, I started looking at Instagram and I saw a cute puppy. And then 2 minutes later, I felt really upset and I don't know why. And as we've covered historically on this feed, and as I have said many times in this show and publicly in other places, like, I don't think the internet is bad or bad for us. I think it's that algorithmic for-profit social media currently is designed to addict us and force us to look at things that one of our guests long ago called like car crashes. You don't want to look at it, but you can't look away. And it makes us sad and depressed and anxious. And I'm sorry to be a downer at the top of the show, but I'm setting the stage for something extraordinary, because my guest today, I think he may have the antidote for doom scrolling. Maybe we're going to call it hope scrolling. I'm going to let him talk about that in a second and define those terms. But before we get into that, my guest proves that it's possible. He is a person who is sharing daily, every day, good news about the climate crisis. Most of the news and information we consume about climate change is worrisome, but progress is being made despite what we may think. Governments, nonprofits, companies, and individuals, the entire world is making technological, legal, and social progress on climate change. And if that feels futile or invisible to you, may I recommend that you subscribe to my guest today. His name is Jacob Simon, also known on the internets as Jacob Simon Says. Jacob, welcome to Influence.
What an intro.
How you doing?
Thanks, Matt. I'm doing fantastic. How are you? It's so great to be here. I loved that. Very well put.
I really wanted to set the stage for this topic, which we've covered a lot here. And I'm so moved and inspired by your work. I'm sure many people tell you that, but we'll share that in a moment. But before we get into your brand of hope, I always ask my guests first, when you talk to normal people in your travels, family, friends, who are not necessarily extremely online, what do you say that you do for a living? How do you explain it?
I love the notion that those of us that are extremely online are not normal. That's awesome.
Apologies to any listeners who are also extremely online with us.
I change up my answer based on who I'm talking to, for sure. Yes. Sometimes I say I'm an environmental content creator. Sometimes I say I'm an independent good news reporter or an environmental writer, or I work in environmental media. A lot of different things depending on, I guess, the age and the knowledge I think the person I'm talking to might be able to understand, because some things that I say people wouldn't. I'd say probably the most common thing I'd say is I'm an environmental content creator focused on just good news and progress.
Mm-hmm. And my second question is always, if there are older members in your family or friend circles, like parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles who are not the most internet savvy, do they understand how you make a living today on the internet?
No, absolutely not.
What do they think you do? Do they get any of it, or
My parents are my biggest fan. Nice. They support me. They've always supported me in anything that I do. My mom, probably no exaggeration, has reposted every single video I've ever made on her Instagram story.
Love it.
So she's seeing what I'm creating, and she can understand, like, when I'm posting an ad, obviously I'm getting paid for that type of relationship.
Yep.
My grandparents, not at all. My 95-year-old grandpa, whenever I'm on the phone with him, he knows I run a business. He asks how the business is going.
Okay.
And then he usually asks me, how's climate change going? I'm like, well, we're trying our best. So I know he cares. He understands somewhat, like, the industry that I'm working in, and that I do writing and I report on news stories. Like I think I've been able to communicate that to him, but that's as far as it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to make it clear to listeners and to you, Jacob, too. Like, I don't like positioning that as like an ageist question. It's more like I am fascinated by the radical generational shift between, our generation or younger people and the people who did not encounter the internet when they were teenagers coming of age or born with it. And, you know, it's a larger conversation about technological progress, leaving people behind, or confusing generational communication. But I'm always fascinated by, yes, your grandfather understands that you are a business owner, but how the business gets done, very unclear.
Yeah, and he's always like, when I go on vacation or I'm just traveling and continuing to work, he's like, well, how are you going to contact your clients? Are you going to call them? And I can't exactly explain that, like, I use email or I'll like DM them on Instagram or something like that. So I'm like, yeah, like I call them through the internet is what
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
say.
Okay. I'll
But
Skype
also,
them.
yeah, exactly. I will say it's not, like you said, it's not just an ageist thing. Like some old high school friends I see that like are not in the kind of digital world, and we
Right.
we catch up after many years, and they're like, do you do this full time? Like, how do you make money? What are you
Right.
doing? So
Right.
they don't necessarily know ahead of time, but I can explain to them a lot easier because most of them are on social media and kind of understand the premise.
Yep. So, in your own words, why don't you share with our listeners who may not be familiar with your work, what is it you do? And I'm going to play clips of your some of your videos as well, so people can see and hear them. But how do you explain the work to your average internet follower or audience member?
Yeah. So, as you explained, Matt, I'm posting every weekday
Mm-hmm.
and I pull in just the good environmental news that I basically find. So, I'm combing through many publications, probably 30 every morning, in addition to some newsletters and some other social media pages, and people send me stories as well. And I'm selecting around four of the quote unquote best, most progressive, most like forward moving, inspirational stories related to the environment or climate. And it ranges from policy to different solutions to improvements in the natural world, animals coming back from near extinction,
Mm-hmm.
things like that, trying to cover a range of environmental and climate topics. And yeah, I just relay them to my audience and oftentimes try and attach an action item
Mm-hmm.
so people can keep the good going and feel empowered and inspired and motivated to hear that someone, usually a regular person, just steps up to the plate and decides to do something to make the world better.
I know.
And so can anyone else. So can you, listening to this, and here's how you can do it.
We'll talk about which of your videos kind of get the most inspiration or traction. But personally speaking, having watched a lot of your work recently, the ones where it's like, oh, this person who lives on an island in the Pacific like started a petition and now the whole laws are changed. I'm like, that is the most empowering thing to me, because we'll talk about this more. I and many people probably feel like there's nothing we can do as individuals. Like, it is a governmental, legal, regulatory thing that needs to happen. And that is true. But like, if I put this plastic bottle in my recycling bin, is that actually doing anything? And it feels hopeless sometimes, or not hopeless, but futile, I guess.
Totally. And that's exactly why I try and focus on human stories,
Yep.
because as humans, we connect with other humans probably more than other things. So if I, like you mentioned, if I talk about a law being changed, that's great. And you might be like, oh, that's awesome. But if I talk about how it got changed and who was behind it and how, like you said, it started with just a single petition on Facebook, like, and then it changed the entire country's laws, that's inspirational. And it's like, I could start a petition. So I could start, a nonprofit. I can learn some kind of science, some kind of sustainability sciences, and create a solution as well. Like, there's a lot of things that you can do as an individual
Mm-hmm.
that are maybe more impactful than recycling that bottle.
Yes. You call yourself a storyteller, and you're honing in on exactly that. Citing, hey, a regulatory policy, maybe not the most fun thing, but inspirational storytelling is where it's at. Before we share clips of your work, you have had many jobs and have worn many hats in your life, including world class professional figure skating. What were you doing before you fell into this line of work?
Yeah, when I was 7, I started figure skating. I did pairs, so that's like double as me with a partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I followed my older siblings into the sport. I never wanted to, but they both did, and my mom had nowhere else to put me, so she'd have to bring me to the rink.
Interesting.
And I still didn't want to, but one day my brother got to stay up past his bedtime and get free candy for doing an ice show. And I'm like, hold on, this is changing the game. Let me get in on this sport. But I didn't really want to do it, so I did pairs so I could have a friend to talk to the whole time.
Nice. Okay.
And the plan was just to do that until I went to college and became kind of a normal kid.
Okay.
But my junior year of high school, I made Team USA. I medaled at nationals. I got sent to the Czech Republic and Germany to compete in junior Grand Prix. And I was like, I can't stop now. This is so awesome. And I kind of grew to love it and continued, moved to Colorado Springs to train at the Olympic Training Center, was there for 5 years, taking courses part-time on the side, training full-time. And then I dislocated my shoulder and I couldn't lift a human being over my head anymore.
No. Permanently, like it's an injury that prevents you from.
So I'm good now.
Okay.
It just took a very long time. It took 2 years basically of like extensive physical therapy. Right. And by that time I was not in peak athletic shape anymore. And it would have been very difficult to come back. And I also had started to move on and look at what else was out there for me. And I studied communications and media in school. And when I was injured, I went to school full time and graduated as quickly as I could. And that was in the thick of COVID, 2020, May of 2020.
Okay.
And I kind of fell into a copywriting role at a PR agency.
Okay.
Doing some social media management as well. And it was cool. Had like big flashy clients, but wasn't like invested and didn't have my heart in it. It wasn't meaningful to me. I didn't really care about making these giant companies just even bigger and richer.
Yep.
And I did a lot of like traveling and seeing a different way of living. And I had so much more free time now that I wasn't a full-time athlete. And I was like, I can do things on my own time. So I started taking environmental courses just as an adult and doing some freelance writing as well on the side. And I started building that freelance writing up and networking with all these environmental people. And writing is a great thing to freelance.
You were writing for like environmental publications or news outlets?
I started out writing for whatever I could find. Okay. And most of that was like social media captions for just random businesses. Okay. And then through the courses I took, I started networking with environmental companies and helping them more with their marketing. So copywriting, helping with emails or website copy, social media, blogs, things like that. Yep. And then, excuse me. And then I started consulting for some environmental organizations as well and posting my own content. And as that started doing really well, it seemed like something I could help environmental orgs with at the same time. So I was juggling a lot of hats, doing this writing, doing consulting, marketing, making my own content. And then obviously I had my heart in my own stuff because it was very special to me and I really believed in the mission. So once it got to the point where I felt pretty comfortable supporting myself just in my own positivity lens, I took the leap and kind of phased down the other things and went full time late last year in just my own content.
Okay. Yeah, you're answering some of my my additional questions. We'll get deeper into those momentarily. Briefly before we move on to clips, just staying with your past life for a moment. Two questions. One, I'm so ignorant of professional sports and figure skating and Olympic sports and all that. So like, the Team USA, this is professional. Like to go to the Olympics, you have to be like amateur. But so can you just explain where were you in relation to, the figure skating that the average person might watch on TV? Like you were competing at a very high level. Is that right?
Yes. So the figure skating you watch on TV is amateur. Okay. The professional figure skating is shows. So that's like a Disney on Ice, Cirque du Soleil, something like that. Where you're getting directly paid for the skating that you're doing. The amateur skating, the competitive figure skating for Team USA is, you get paid in the sense of like your federation supports your training expenses and you can get prize money from competitions.
And endorsements if you become a face or name,
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Yes. But you're not getting directly paid for the skating you're doing in that professional sense.
So you were positioned to do Olympic competition. Did you ever go to an Olympic Games?
I did not. That was
Okay.
the end goal. That was the end goal for me and everyone else in Colorado at
Okay.
that
That
training
makes
center
sense.
as well.
Okay.
I got to go to Worlds, Junior World Championships in 2016. I guess that was kind of like where my career peaked. I got
Mm-hmm.
ninth place, so top 10 at Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Very overjoyed with that. And then the end goal was the Olympics, but got injured before I had the chance.
So that's my second question is, you didn't really want to get into figure skating as a kid. Like, it wasn't your jam, but then it became your identity, and then an injury like robbed you of your path. And so that sounds very difficult to come back from emotionally, mentally, and to pivot to something very successful so quickly is also rare and extraordinary. So, like, just briefly, like, was it that sounds like it was difficult?
Yes, it was devastating.
Yeah,
I was lost. I mean, my
yeah.
entire life was skating. You know, like I said, I started when I was 7, and I made so many sacrifices throughout my life to make it in the sport. And I would skate before school, and I would get out of school as quickly as I could and go right to the rink. And I would, have a less of a social life, and I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be able to hang out like late on the weekends. And I didn't really like get to pursue in an academic sense what I may have otherwise, just for like
Right.
timing wise. I had to
Sure.
prioritize my sport.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was all taken away from me, not on my own terms. It wasn't my decision to stop. It was taken away. And there were no resources for me to determine what to do next. It was
Yeah,
really a
yeah.
tough transition. And I was very lost for a long time.
It's not one to one, but it reminds me of this all this discussion about technology and job replacement of like, yeah, it's cool to teach coal miners to code, but like, a 40, 50-year-old coal miner is not going to make a living coding without rigorous support and programs and training, whatever. You know what I mean? So it's like, anyway, it's just that those transitions sound really brutal.
Yeah.
Did you get injured while skating, or was it like an unrelated injury?
While skating in practice,
Ugh.
I was doing a lift that my partner and I invented, and we were so excited. We had trained for months off ice before we could even do it on the ice, and it was just like a long training day. And the balance point was very small in this lift, and it was over my head, and the weight just got a little too far outside, and I was trying to save it because I
Oh
just wanted to move
no.
on, and my shoulder just couldn't take it and snapped out and dropped my partner on my back, thankfully, so she was okay.
Okay.
And yeah, I could like it felt horrible. Like I was in a lot of pain, and I was like, this is not good. Went home for the day, and then it just was so loose because your shoulder's held in place by ligaments,
Yeah.
and once they stretch, they don't go back. It's kind of like
Wow.
taffy.
Wow.
So my shoulder was just popping out again and again. And essentially, like at a high level, what I did was strengthen the muscles around the shoulder, so it's held in place more by
Right.
the muscle than the ligament at this point. So
Yeah.
it's good. I have full range of motion and full strength and everything, but like I mentioned, it just took a long time, and yeah, it was obviously very devastating. Thankfully, I guess a little bit of a silver lining. It happened when I was young. The
Okay.
nature of figure skating, you're young. Like
Yeah.
if you're 30 in skating, you're considered quite old.
Of course. Yeah.
Which is the case for a lot of sports, I
Of course.
guess, because it's just so brutal on your body. You have to be quite young for it.
Yes.
So it happened at a time where I could easily transition to something else, and I also felt great that I had the control to do what I wanted to do, kind of for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I knew that I enjoyed certain parts of skating. I really enjoyed the passion and the ability to have such a strong goal to work towards and
Right.
dedicate everything into achieving this goal. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's rare in life to have
Yep.
such a singular focus.
Yes.
And I needed that. And I needed some kind of like competitive atmosphere as well. And I wanted to create something of my own because figure skating is a half technical and half judge sport. And
Yeah.
it's how you present yourself. It's the
Art,
choreography.
athletic and artistic simultaneously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's also very rare for a sport. And I grew to love it. And it's fun, being able to come up with your own programs each year and tell a story and kind of do acting at the same time
Mm-hmm.
of doing this very high level elite athleticism.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted something kind of like that in whatever I did next. And hopefully I'm starting to find it.
Yeah, I think you are. You're making me realize that even if you didn't get injured, the clock would run out on skating for you and any athlete at some point, and you would have to find a new life or career. And I, again, I don't follow sports very closely, but I am fascinated with stories of like, well, I'm retired at 30 from whatever football, and now I'll be depressed or go into sportscasting if I have a person like what you like. I'm a million, NFL guys. I'm a millionaire, and I'll never get this back. Anyway,
Yeah,
you would have
I will
perhaps
say,
you would have ended up here regardless. You know what I mean?
yeah, maybe. Who's to say? I will say, like I said, there's no resources for a transition, and most skaters just stay in the sport in some kind of like coaching or
right.
show kind of atmosphere, or like
Yes.
managing a rink or something like that.
Right.
It wasn't for me. I knew there was such a big world out there, and I wanted to see what else I could do.
All right. So speaking of a singular focus and a passion, you've made this transition to hopeful videos, hope about the climate crisis. I want to play some clips of your work here, so listeners and viewers can see what we're talking about, and hopefully get inspired and hop over to your Instagram and TikTok.
For the first and only time, it's June 24th, 2024, and here are the most promising stories of the day. Amazon rainforest deforestation in Brazil has dropped 40% since last year and reached the lowest level since 2018, even during a rise in forest fires, trending closer to President Lula's pledge of zero deforestation by 2030. 3, the world's largest survey on climate by the UN in Oxford found 4 out of 5 people want their country to take more climate action, 72% want to move away from fossil fuels, and 86% said countries should put differences aside and work together to solve this. 2, the first class of American Climate Corps has officially been sworn in, which is a federal program to get 20,000 young folks into good jobs this year, like restoring landscapes, installing solar, and farming sustainably. And 13 young people just won a legal battle against Hawaii, which will force zero-emission transportation by 2045, an unprecedented victory, proving the state's pro-fossil fuel policies violated citizens' constitutional rights. Stick around for more stories of progress. I wish my friends knew that Vanuatu reduced their plastic waste to just 2% thanks to a Facebook petition, and here's how. This small nation of 80 islands near Australia used to be drowning in single-use plastics, but in March of 2017, Christelle Tieffry, a French immigrant, was so fed up with the bag-filled skies and seas that she started a Facebook page and petition called No Plastic Bag Please, which rapidly gained 2,000 signatures, quite a lot for the nation of just 290,000 people, and ended up on the foreign minister's desk, who addressed it in a nationwide speech and implemented a ban with a hefty 20,000 vatu or $160 fine, which extended to banning single-use cutlery, plates, and fake flowers in 2020. A few exceptions were made, and global plastic still washes up on their shores, so the fight isn't over, but many plastics have been replaced with local organic materials like native pandanus leaves or coconut, which has reduced the nation's total plastic waste from 35% down to 2%. And the path to get there started with a single action, so maybe we can continue this trend around the world. If you need a breath of fresh air, stick around for more stories of progress.
So you make this transition and you start, like you said, you're copywriting, but then you're making your own content. And you mentioned earlier, like, oh, it started to do well. Like, what did that look like? Because as we said at the top of the show, like, algorithms just prioritize doom and gloom and hey, what are your friends doing, and what, like FOMO, and it's just, so like I'm amazed actually that your style of content is sort of breaking through in the short form ecosystem of content. So like, what's going on there? Who's watching? This is only like 2 years ago, like, right?
Yeah. So 2 years ago, this kind of project actually started in one of the environmental courses I took. It was the Climate-Based Fellowship, and part of that was a capstone project. And I started a newsletter curating all of the positive environmental headlines and just sending it to my fellow classmates. And me and my co-founder, Anushka, we were working on this newsletter for several weeks in the course, and then we continued after. And what started out as just our classmates extended to family and friends and then strangers in this newsletter. And people were really resonating with it. And they would send us these messages and be like, I really needed this. Like,
how did it reach strangers? It was public on the internet, like just so classmates could subscribe, but like, were they sharing it with friends and family? Is that how it trickled out?
Word of mouth.
Okay.
Yeah. Word of mouth. And, we would obviously tell like other people as well. Like, if you know anyone that works in the environment and needs a little dose of optimism, like send them our way. And people were saying that, everyone in this course was in their free time dedicating their learning power, their brain power to working on solutions. And it was still quite depressing. All these things we were learning about were just really negative.
Yeah.
And we were learning about positive stuff as well. It just wasn't talked about as much. And it was hard to be motivated. For me specifically, like obviously I can't get in the minds of other people, but I was like, I'm pretty sure I want to do this thing and like help the planet as much as I can. And this is going to be hard. And I need something to latch on to. I'm not the type of person that is going to rise up and act out of fear. Some people will. Some people, if you say, we're doomed unless we act right now, great, you'll feel empowered and you will act right now. Me and perhaps another group of people need to be part of a community and feel like we are achieving something positive together and that there's a fighting chance. And there absolutely is. And I figured, me and Anushka, that if we curated these stories, we can make people realize that there is a fighting chance. And look at all this good happening. You probably didn't hear about 95% of it, but it still is going on. Let's talk about it more.
Yeah. This is core to the problem, which is, do you think the solutions are not they're not coming as fast as the bad news, or are they there and happening, but media does not give them enough attention? Which of those is the bigger thing?
It's a good question. I think generally speaking, traditional news media, legacy media, super negative by design. It's systematically negative because it's better business to be.
Yep.
And pretty much every problem we have has a solution that either already exists, is being developed, or people are working really hard to figure it out. And the more that I've done this and found these stories, the more that becomes like quite obvious. And the best part about this climate crisis is that we have the solutions. They're here. They're kind of obvious at this point. It's phase down fossil fuels, build out more renewable power, make this transition as fast and equitable as possible. And I think that last part is the important part. It needs to happen now. It needs to happen in the past, but the second best time is for it to happen now. And I think that the negative stories we hear about are, the ramifications of this climate change happening around the world because it's affecting all of us already. That's not to say that we're not also improving in a lot of ways. We are. And I think that it's important for people to understand the severity of the situation. And, not every story that comes out in the world is positive. And I'm not pretending like everything I cover is, all encompassing. But it's almost the polar opposite of traditional news, where it's like pretty much everything they report on is negative. And they are coming off with this framework that like, this is just the world. It's not like this is just the negative stuff. It's like, this is just the world. Let us talk for the next hour and 50 minutes of it will just be like really, really depressing.
I mean, some of it is malicious is a strong word, but like you said, there is a business incentive to be negative. And I think that's obvious, but also, just a simple analogy is like, well, when a house is on fire, that's news, but it's not news when 1,000 other houses are not on fire. Hey, breaking news, everyone went to work and school today and everyone was safe and happy.
Totally.
It's not a thing. So that bias is obviously inherent. So this is kind of a weird, broad question, but like, how are people finding your content? Or like how, in a world where news is so negative, how are they making their way to you? And are they surprised? People must be like, whoa, I had no idea that this was happening. Who's this guy? This is great.
To be very clear, it didn't just happen overnight.
No. I mean, I think, trickling in and the snowball starting to accumulate, right?
Totally. I think that it was a lot of refining and figuring out the right way to frame things. When I started making content, so I was doing this newsletter and then I came up with the thought that, short form video is booming. Why don't I try just talking about the same exact thing we're writing about and just making a video about it? And it was okay. I had to overcome like my fear of being on camera and learning how to look into like a camera screen. And say things a way that people will resonate with it. And it took a while to figure that out. And then I started framing things as like, here's the good climate news, and then go into it. And I think that for a lot of people, it kind of put up a wall where you hear something about climate, you either are bracing yourself for something negative.
Yeah, you're like, oh, here's another thing. Yeah.
Right. Or there's a small subset of people that will, put up a wall and not even listen and be like, climate, I don't believe in that.
Right.
Very few people, but they're loud, especially on the internet.
I was wondering about that. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a minute for sure.
Great. But I changed it to just, here's the good news. And then if you listen, 95% of the things I talk about are related to the environment. Occasionally I sneak something else in there, like student loan debt being alleviated or something along those lines that I think, it's all interconnected anyways. Sure. But I think that reframing and then also figuring out just different, video best practices. And I think I came up with a pretty good hook that kind of, I start most of my videos by saying, for the first and only time, it's
I know, I love
date.
that. I love that. That's really fun.
I love it too. And it was inspired by an art piece, and it just really struck me to my core when I saw this. And it was something similar. And I think that it lets people open their mind a little bit more and realize that like, oh, today is special. If not for any other reason that like then it won't happen again.
It has never happened and will never happen again. So what are we all going to do with June 25th, 2024? Yeah,
exactly. And like, we can remember it for a lot of different things. Let's choose to remember it for some good stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that a lot of comments are like that opening line like really struck a chord with me. Like I had never thought about that before. Yeah. And I totally get it, because the same exact thing happened to me. And I think that the positive news is something people crave. It's something that is very rare. Yeah. And it's not just like superficial either. I think I do a pretty good job of, like I said, providing action items or providing a range of things, Animal recovery stories has the most general appeal. Yep. Anyone is happy if an animal bounces back from near extinction, especially if it's a cute one. But I balance that with also some policy updates that are probably a lot more boring. And
others have described it, this is common, like it's candy and vegetables. You get the cute stuff and the fun stuff, and then you shovel in some broccoli with that, and that's also, whoa, that's good too,
Exactly. And I know that I've done a good job of it, because a lot of the time the quote unquote negative comments I get are like, I didn't really agree with story 3, but the rest were great.
Okay.
I'm like, oh, well, thanks for giving your take. Like, this is why I included it. This is why I thought it was good news. Like, thanks for being respectful. And I think because I put out so much positivity and good vibes in the way that I communicate the stories, people usually give that back to me.
Yes.
And they give it to each other in the comments as well. Like, someone will say, oh, like, this was such great news for my birthday. And then, they'll get 15 like happy birthday messages from complete strangers.
Yeah.
And
nice.
It's just like a really wholesome side of the internet. And I think that because of that, people are sharing the videos with their friends. They're posting it to their story. Yep. They're, providing this breath of fresh air for their community as well, because we can all use it. We all deserve some good news. And a lot of the time I see people say, this is the only piece of good news I heard all day. And that's a shame. I wish so many more people talked about the good news as well and realized like how great the world is in so many ways, and balancing this just overflow and this very heavy weight on our backs of all this negativity happening all around us. And it takes a toll, and it makes us feel like we're living in unprecedented times that are like the worst they've ever been. And that's not the case. In so many ways, it's the best.
It's the best time in human history. If we lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago, like 2 to 3 generations ago, we probably all would have died as babies, or been orphans, or worked in a factory, or worked in a farm until we were 35 and collapsed from heart. Like medicine and technology, climate control, like the ability to like, I can do my job from my desk in air conditioning and make up and put food on my table. Like, that's amazing. It's not a bad time.
I still can't believe when I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I'm going to pick up my phone, talk for a minute, and that's my job.
And that's your job. Yep.
It's so crazy to
and
me.
inspire millions of people. Speaking of, so I'm curious about the structure. How did you land on the sort of like, you're in New York City and you're walking down a street. So you're sort of in your natural habitat, let's say, right? So that there's authenticity and realness there. But you are also, you're, like you said, you're looking to camera. So you're speaking to your audience, but you're also reading from a loose script, or perhaps a very specific script, because you've done a lot of research and homework to make sure that your stories are accurate. So like that's more complicated than just whipping out your phone and talking for 60 seconds. I know that.
Sure,
but I hope
sure.
but I'm spoiling that others should understand that there's some production values that go into this here.
Totally. And actually the filming is probably the easiest part. The definitely the lengthiest part is all the research I do. And I comb through all these publications. I just find the good news. I decide what I want to include. I read through it. I usually write a script that's too long for short form video, and I need to figure out how I can cut it down and make it as concise as possible, but still include the information that's necessary to include.
Right.
That's a struggle. And then, I load it into a teleprompter app to shatter the illusion.
I assumed that was the case.
I wasn't at first.
Yeah.
I was memorizing it, and I write the script in a deliberate way.
Yeah.
I'm a writer first and foremost. That's, what I was doing. And I'd write the script in a deliberate way, and I'd want, the specific wording, and obviously with statistics and sources and things like that, it's necessary to.
Yeah.
But I don't like editing. So I was very deliberate from the start. I'm going to film this in one take.
Yes.
Because I don't want to edit. It's my least favorite part of the process. And I'm doing this alone.
You got to choose if you want to do the work up front or the work on the end. And I think you got to do it either way, but choosing to do it up front gives you the added benefit of like, oh, it's a real guy doing real stuff in his real phone on one take. It's not fancy. It's not highly produced. It's just real. And that therefore, the phone, you're selfieing, but you're also running the teleprompter at the same time. That works well.
Yeah, it's a teleprompter app. It's literally just called teleprompter. And
but it's on the phone. It's not attached or anything.
It's on the phone.
Great.
It's on the phone. And I have the sources there and everything. And it just records at the same time, so I can read and scroll and do it all at the same time.
The app records the video.
Exactly. Yep.
Whoever
so I'm just filming
that,
selfie style.
Smart.
Oh, so smart. Yeah. I tell all my creator friends to use it if they're not.
Get this. Yes.
And it's changed the game for me. Cause like you said, I'm posting every weekday, and I got to make it as efficient as possible. And this way I do all the heavy research. I write the script, and I know I'm going to say the words that I intend to say.
Yeah.
And I'm walking and talking at the same time. And it's like a little bit, in New York City, there's a lot of people around. There's a lot of distractions. Like,
have you ever had a car or a bike be like, whoa, like you have messed up takes from that?
Yes. All the time. Yeah.
You start a Patreon and put the bloopers on there as bonus content.
Definitely I got so many bloopers. And like I said, I film it in one take. So sometimes I include like a little blips if I stutter a little bit, or if there's, a car horn and that you can still hear me, but you can hear it in the background. I'll include that. It makes it more authentic. I'm trying to give off the vibe that I'm kind of just FaceTiming with a friend, and we're going for a walk, and I'm talking to them about the good news. And actually for a while I was just using the like Apple headphones that just plug in and using that microphone. Unfortunately, New York City is too loud for that. So now I use like a better kind of noise canceling mic.
The pattern must be like right here so that you're not getting all that ambient noise.
Right in front of me. Exactly.
You're making me realize people must assume when they see you on the street working that you are FaceTiming, that you're not like, selfieing or whatever. But I don't know.
They probably assume I'm a tourist, because lots of tourists are taking out their phone and snapping pictures of random buildings and stuff like that.
Yep.
But yeah, I definitely could be FaceTiming. I do, if you notice in my videos, I include like overlays of images and videos above my head. So I hold it like awkwardly high. It's like if you were FaceTiming like someone over your head almost, because I just want to make up like the bottom half of the video.
Yeah, you look like, right. Okay, great.
Yeah.
We need a behind the scenes documentary.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And then one more thing, I deliberately film all my videos outside
Yes.
for my mental health.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? If I'm going to be doing this every day, why don't I make it a requirement in my videos that I'm walking around outside so that I walk around outside every day?
Get those steps, bake it into the workday.
Exactly. Because I knew if I was filming from inside my room and doing it, meetings from inside my room and everything from inside my room, I wouldn't leave my room.
Yes.
So I wanted to bake that in, and it's a great idea.
I'm sorry to keep you locked up here for an hour.
We'll go for a walk next time.
So when were you realizing that this was really taking off? Obviously, it started slow, but like when strangers at a scale, like a certain number of people were like, "Whoa!" and it really started catching fire. Was it virality or was it a slow buildup?
I think it wasn't virality. I think it was, I did have, at a certain point, I had a series of videos do quite well and build my profile, but I think I had confidence in the idea beforehand. And it was just people really resonating with it. It was the comments where people are like, this content changed my life.
Yeah.
Or it was especially the comments where people were like, you inspired me to go to my school and pitch them on adding solar panels to our energy repertoire, or you inspired me to do plastic free July and try and cut out all my plastic in July. And I'm like, these are complete strangers, and I'm just talking about news that I find and relaying it, and it's inspiring them to take action in their own community. Like, that is cool.
Yes.
And I was like, now it can have an impact. My goal with creating this is to make the world a better place in any way I can. And I studied communication and media. I think I'm a eloquent speaker and a good communicator and a good writer. So I'm leaning into those strengths, and seeing and hearing people taking what I'm doing and applying it to their own life is when I felt like I'm onto something. Yep. And then virality came later just through consistency. Yep. And it's just, the first year plus is brutal. It's, seeing your friends.
That is,
it's tough. It's tough. And it's quite honestly draining on mental health. It's really hard because you depend on videos doing well to achieve your goal of like building this presence and making a living. So if I work really hard on a video and it doesn't do well, it feels really bad.
Yep.
And then I become almost dependent on that boost of like seeing a video do well, and I'm like chasing that again. So I think I've developed thick skin over time and a lot of practices to reduce my screen time and be able to kind of focus on what's important, which is telling the stories to the people that are going to listen to it and believing in the mission and believing in the message more so than the video performance. That said, it's also important, like I said, to make a living. So it's an interesting balance, but I really do think that the virality just came from having a good idea and doing it over and over again.
Yep. Speaking of making a living, what does it look like for you these days? Not in real numbers, of course, but like, is it Patreon? Is it brand sponsorships? Is it ads on the platforms? I'm sure you're not selling merch, but maybe you are. Maybe you're thinking about it. What does that what does that look like, and how do you manage it these days?
Yes, not selling merch, but the vast majority of my income is collaborating with organizations and telling their story. So I'm so fortunate that a lot of the time it's environmental nonprofits trying to kind of gain some attention to a cause, get the public to sign a petition or generate consumer backlash for this bad practice that a brand is doing, something like that. And it's almost always something I would do for free. It's like something I really care about and I would definitely like sign the petition right away. And it's oftentimes stories that I find on my own, and then these brands come to me and I'm like, oh yeah, like I'd heard about that. Like I was considering talking about it. This is so perfect. And like I said, it's something I would do for free. I can't. I can't do it for free.
You've tapped into a market in a really fascinating way, because you're doing this, like you said, to do good in the world, but huge nonprofits with big budgets, they have money and they are doing really good work, but they're traditionally not amazing at communicating on social media. So here you come being like, hey, I have this audience and I have this alignment. Um, who, if I'm a fashion influencer, then of course the shoe and the clothing brands are going to come to me. But like, you have created a funnel, a flow for a new market, I guess. Are there other people doing what you do? Are there copycats? Were you or were you inspired by other creators who were sort of doing what you did? Or is it like whole cloth, like new thing?
There's a bunch of very inspiring environmental creators, environmental communicators, teaching, educating online. Not so many that focus just on positivity. There are some other positivity creators. I definitely don't feel like anyone copied me. In fact, I'm always saying more people should do exactly what I do. Like, please.
Yes.
I would love.
It's not a bad thing. Please copy.
Yes, please copy me. That's why I'm very open with exactly like, my process and everything, because it's a lot of work and most people don't have the time for it. But everyone I think in the environmental movement is very supportive of each other, and we help each other out. We send each other resources. We're, commenting and engaging with each other because we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And sometimes I get asked like, who's your biggest competitor or something like that. I'm like, that doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
We're all trying to stop, climate destruction and make the planet a better place. And we need just so many more people on board. So I think that environmental communication on social media is very tricky. Mm-hmm. And I am very, very fortunate to just be focusing on the positivity, because a lot of my friends who don't and talk about more negative situations get a lot of hate, especially women, and especially women of color in the space. Yes. I see get so much more hate than me.
Of course.
And a lot of it's trolls, and it's not worth paying attention to. And of course I get some hate comments as well. Mm-hmm. But I think, I kind of live in a world that's a lot more enjoyable and positive because of the type of stuff I talk about. And I sometimes feel motivated to like talk about things that aren't quite as positive, but I've been able to frame that in light that's my own, in a way that if a pipeline's being built and it's going to, be emitting several hundreds of thousands of tons of emissions every year, not so great. But if 500,000 people have rallied behind and signed a petition to stop it, that's what I'll latch onto and focus on. Right. It's like, here's this pipeline. It sucks. Look at all these people trying to stop it.
Yep.
Let's help them. Let's support them. Let's be one of them.
That's the lead of the story for you, as opposed to how the media might report on it.
Exactly.
I mean, you basically already said this, but you're making me realize too that like bad news about climate educates me about what's going on, but does not inspire me to take action. The positive spin also does educate me, but makes me want to, like you said, start a thing at my school, do this, do that. And that is such a differentiator here.
Totally. And I think that is absolutely true for people living in the US, people living in, the West and in developed nations.
Right.
If you're living in a place where, your home is flooding and there's fires and you're evacuating, then, I mean, A, you're not able to take action because you're trying to survive, but B, you may be more likely to take action from experiencing that. I think that's another like very big driver. Like if you've experienced things firsthand and you had the education to understand that it's from climate, which is a big caveat. A lot of people don't have that.
I was going to say that's a huge part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So education is super, super important and vital to making people take action as well. Probably the most vital thing actually is education level, because if you don't know something is bad, how can you solve it? Yes. So if if there's a poisonous mushroom in the forest, you won't know to stop it unless someone tells you, or unless you see your friend eat it and get sick. So it's kind of got to be one of those two things. And the environmental creator community is doing the education part. Yeah. And we're trying to prevent the second part from happening, because it's happening all around us. We're experiencing these heat waves and we're experiencing fires and all these things. If we have the money and fortune to be able to avoid it and still be comfortable, perhaps we'll be able to do that and not necessarily take action. If we don't, then it's like, it's here, it's hitting us hard and we got to change our ways. And the other thing is like, most climate destruction spurs from developed nations, from richer nations, because we emit a lot more. So it's not really fair to demand developing nations to take the same kind of action. It really needs to stem from us.
Much bigger global discussion of, not fault is the wrong word, but responsibility, right?
Yeah. And I think that the other part of this is that it's very anxiety inducing. There's a 2021 study posted in The Lancet that said 84% of American youth experience some kind of climate anxiety.
Yes.
84%.
Existential anxiety. A friend of mine a couple of years back, we were just talking about mental health in general, and she was like, oh, I read this article. She's a journalist too. I read this article about the rise in like existential therapy focus of like, hey, I have my problems with my job and my family, but also, are we going to be here in 20 years? Are we going to be alive? Are my kids going to grow up in a world? I need to like talk about that. I was like, oh shit.
Yeah. And I think that is a narrative that gets instilled in us from traditional media.
Yes.
And, if you're living in America, you're going to be here in 20 years.
Right.
Like you'll be okay. We need to, it's not productive for anyone to feel so like existentially dreading and so anxious.
Yes.
It's just, we're not going to solve our problems if we're all paralyzed by fear.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are ways to deal with climate anxiety. It's educate yourself on, solutions and the reality of the situation, how we can solve it. It's get involved in a community, and it's take action. Yeah. And I'm trying to provide all three of those to people so we can feel empowered and we can continue the course in the best direction possible. It's like, it'd be great if we cut off all emissions tomorrow. That's not going to happen. So let's do the best that we can so that we can prevent the worst ramifications from the climate crisis. And it's never too late because things can always go in a better direction or they can always go in a worse direction. Mm-hmm. So let's do whatever we can to make it the best possible.
And your stories show that it's never too late because it's like, oh my God, this animal that we thought was gone for the last 100 years is actually doing great. And here's why. And it's like, it reminds me of when, again, sorry to be a downer, COVID, and everyone stopped going places and driving. And scientists were like, oh, the air quality is so much better. Like in 2 weeks, it was so good. I'm like, whoa, the earth can bounce back pretty quick, can heal.
Quick. Yeah. And it's, is another COVID going to happen? Hopefully not. Let's knock on some wood. But it is very great and reflective of the fact that if we stop pumping so many pollutants into our air, then it will improve, and it will improve rapidly. And now that we have that knowledge and we've seen that firsthand, let's push as hard as we can to getting those pollutants out of our air and to making sure that our energy is safe and clean and equitable. And we've had a lot of like really great success stories. One of the most famous is the 1989 Montreal Protocol protecting the ozone layer.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So scientists realized that certain aerosols that are in like refrigerants and hairsprays and things like that are depleting the ozone. And we absolutely need the ozone to survive. And what came out of that was the only UN agreement to have every single country agree to it ever.
Right.
And that was to phase these down. Mm-hmm. And if we did it for the ozone layer and, not that long ago, we can do it again for climate.
Yep.
And there's a lot of hope in that. And renewables are cheaper than ever before. There's so much more knowledge. There's so much more education and data and scientific understanding of the reality of the situation and of how we can change it and for the better. Yep. So for me, that's the super empowering.
You said it. We know the solutions. It's a social and legal problem now. It's not a scientific question anymore. So we'll cover that a little bit more. We have to take a break. Hopefully you have more time to stick around and we have listener questions for you coming up momentarily. But before we take a break, we have to do a court-mandated trivia segment where I attempt to stump you with a trivia question. It's multiple choice, but it's a trivia question about climate. And I always say to guests, you're an expert, so will you know it right away, or will I be able to stump you? So are you prepared for today's trivia question?
You know what? I'm not a climate scientist. and and in fact, the last math class I took was junior year of high school. So we'll see. I'll do my best.
All right, here we go. It's a little, you'll see, it diverges a little bit from your expertise. So we'll see. This week, of course, we are talking about human-made climate change, right? Not to be confused with global temperature changes on like a geologic timescale, millions and millions of years. Some nefarious people tend to equate those things, and that is silly, and we're not going to go there. Back about 234 million years ago, two important things happened. One, you may have heard of them, dinosaurs. They were kicking it off. They were getting ready to dominate the world. They were getting ready about 20 million years before this, and they lasted for about 200 million years. And then in the oceans, huge volcanic eruptions in the geologic plate that would eventually become North America caused massive global warming. Again, this is 234 million years ago. This radical change in the Earth's climate is called the Carnian pluvial episode, or as I like to call it, CPE. Scientists call it that too.
Nice.
Scientists believe that this moment in like geologic history had an enormous impact on Earth's biodiversity and the evolution of animals and plants. So basically, the creatures that we know and love today, birds, snakes, lizards, and mammals, including us, they owe their lineage to this change in the Earth's temperature and climate at this time. Today's trivia question is, what happened during the Carnian pluvial episode that supercharged the dinosaurs and gave rise to the wildlife we know today? I have three choices for you. Before I give them to you, have you ever heard of this?
No.
Neither did I.
But I'll make my best educated guess, I still believe in myself. I got confidence.
Okay, great. Is it A, the ocean eruptions created flood basalts, which are huge areas of underwater lava that, when cooled, pushed subterranean salt into the oceans at unprecedented levels, making the ocean saltier than ever before? So like a supercharged salt influx changed evolution. That's choice A. B, the warmer climate during this period was too hot for a prehistoric bacteria called conophyton, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, which went extinct at this time. So with this rampant bacteria gone, populations of fish and reptiles exploded, creating entirely new ecosystems. So extinction of life-threatening bacteria changed evolution. That's B. Or is it C? It rained for 2 million years.
Whoa. I hope it's C. That's crazy. 2 million years of rain feels like a lot.
Or as people in London like to call it, Tuesdays.
Exactly. Just to be clear on the rules here, I don't get a phone a friend or a 50-50 or anything.
You cannot phone a friend. What I will say is, I say to most guests, your reputation as a creator is on the line. So if you get it wrong, you will be discredited and shamed for the rest of your career. But if you get it right, I'll pay for graduate school for you for climate science.
Wow, big stakes. Okay, so we have salt, we have bacteria, or we have rain.
Correct.
I'm gonna go with. I really hope it's C, but I'm gonna go with A.
Okay. Jacob chooses a huge boost in salty oceans as the reason for this big change. We will find out.
The ocean's pretty salty. I don't know if you ever got a gulp.
No, he's got a point. We will find out if Jacob is correct after this important break. Thank you so much for listening to Influence, and it is time to thank the Patreon supporters, all of you who contribute even a single dollar every month. It really, really helps the show, keeps it sustainable, helps us grow, helps us reach out to new and exciting guests and cover interesting topics, perhaps topics that you or I have never even conceived of. Perhaps they are inconceivable. But of course, it is that part of the show where we thank the executive producers and higher who support this show at $10 a month or more. Those fine people are William, Duran, Jerry Duran, Dominic Kerr, Bowie Barks, and of course, Ken M. Thank you so much to everyone who supports this show monthly, who enjoys listening to it, even if you are unable to support at this time, just by listening to this or watching it or sharing it or hitting a like button, leaving a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps the show grow. Thank you so much. We're back with Jacob Simon. You know him as Jacob Simon Says, at Jacob Simon Says on all the social medias. And before we took a break, I asked him a question 234 million years ago underwater. Having trouble. Talking is challenging for me as a podcaster. It's getting bad. Underwater volcanoes changed the course of evolution. Why did that happen? It was called the Carnian-Pluvian episode. Was it A, that the oceans got way saltier? Jacob chose A as his answer. Was it B, that it caused the extinction of a very harmful bacteria that allowed other animals to thrive? Or was it C, that it just rained nonstop for 2 million years? I always give guests a chance to reconsider their answer after the break. Have you had second thoughts?
No.
Okay. Jacob is sticking with A, the salty oceans. The correct answer is C. Lots of rain. 2 million years of rain.
Okay.
I love this sort of stuff because it reminds us how small and insignificant we are. Like we're like the seasons and summer and winter, and we live in North America and here. And then like you just have to rewind a little bit, and you're like, oh right, the whole planet was different for millions of years before we ever even were a glimmer in the thought of nature, right?
Yeah. That's intense. I hope they had good umbrellas or something, because it sounds miserable. But yeah, I know. I like to think about that all the time, where it's like we have such a small range in temperature that we can exist in. Yeah. And we pretty much exist in it like all the time. So we are quite fortunate. And yes. I don't know if you could see these images behind me, but I'm very into space as well. And I love thinking about how small we are in the grand scheme of the universe. And it blows my mind every time.
Absolutely. In short, lots and lots of moisture and rain was very good for some animals and very detrimental to other ecosystems. And so reptiles, birds, and mammals were kicking off. And it supercharged the dinosaurs basically, and they got very bigger. I assume more rain, more vegetation, more plants to eat, more dinosaurs, bigger dinosaurs, carnivorous dinosaurs, and then. Sure. Then we took care of that problem with an asteroid 65 million years ago. So,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Listen, like I said, I'm not a climate scientist. Could have reported on the story if I was there, but not this time.
Primary sources. All right. So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned, occasional haters in the comments or non-believers, whatever we may call them. I wanted to touch on what you said of like, you have created a space of positivity, and therefore your audience is positive. And it just briefly, like I have done a lot of different content stuff on the internet, media companies, and my own projects, and one of them was like a channel about our family, and it was family focused, and it was kids, and it was wholesome. And for decades, people are like, the YouTube comments, it's a cesspool, and I was like, I don't think we've gotten a single negative comment in the X number of years we've been doing this. And I think about that often of like, if you create a positive space, most of your audience will also be positive, as you said. But then occasionally you're getting what? Deniers? And how do you do you ignore them, or do you respond? And how do you respond, if at all?
It depends. If someone is trolling me, I usually won't respond, or maybe I'll say like LOL and just feed into it, because it is pretty funny sometimes. Yes. If people are, talking in a respectful way and actually perhaps seeming like they want to get some input and learn,
a good faith conversation.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And, are most hate comments like that? No, but some are. And it is nice to have a conversation with them. I think people forget sometimes that like I'm a human being, and if you say something hateful, I am reading it, and it's not something you'd say to my face. Even if you had the same feelings and thoughts, you'd say it in a more respectful way.
Right.
The majority of hate, or I guess backlash, comes from when I get like more technical.
Okay.
And when I talk about, solution, like renewable solutions, there's a form of like climate denial is pretty much gone, and it has morphed into those solutions aren't real solutions. We need to keep burning fossil fuels because renewables are worse, or because it's not feasible to implement renewables, or something like that.
So meaning like these are not people saying climate change is not happening. They're saying that our approach to fixing it is economically wrong or problematic or too hard.
Yes, it's a range of things. People think it's too hard. There's a lot of sacrifice that comes with it. They don't realize that it will actually improve our lives. There's a lot of things around like mining for renewables and rare earth minerals.
Yes.
Again, we mine fossil fuels already as well. So I think it's a lack of education, at its core. And, if someone says like, oh, actually, driving an electric vehicle is worse for the environment than driving a combustion engine car, and that's the comment, I'm like, thanks for saying that. That's not true. It's initially worse in terms of emissions, and then around the 2-year mark on average, it becomes better. And I can explain that, and maybe they'll be like, oh, like, thanks for, and I could, provide them a source as well.
Right.
Maybe they'll say like, thanks. Maybe they'll continue to argue. If they continue after I prove my point, then I'll probably stop. But I do think that there are a lot of good faith commenters. And when I talk about renewables, when I talk about policy that's like phasing down fossil fuels or making polluters accountable or things like that, it's just a lack of education. Not everyone knows that 3/4 of global emissions are from burning fossil fuels for energy. Yeah. And if they did know that, they might understand why it's good news. Or we don't talk about specific things enough necessarily, where it's like air pollution from burning fossil fuels is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths worldwide. Right. So if you had that context ahead of time, then it's like, are renewables perfect? No, they need repairs. They are better in certain areas than others, but they're certainly better than fossil fuels. And we need a range of solutions. A lot of the time when I talk about nuclear
I was
power,
about to say,
it always gets a lot of debate in the comments. And, it's not productive debate because we need both. Yeah. Some places can't have wind and solar, so they need nuclear. Some can,
and
so
also
they don't need
like
it.
If we are going to need 8 billion people with air conditioning, like there is no other, well, you tell me. Nuclear creates exponentially more energy than any other source. And this notion that it is scary or unsafe is complicated, because when an earthquake happens under a reactor and there are no safety measures in place for that, then that's going to be really bad. But overall, like you said, we are literally being poisoned to death by every other power plant right now. Nuclear is incredibly clean and safe.
Right. Nuclear has had 2 very bad, very unfortunate accidents, and everyone knows about it. Fossil fuels kill so many more people, and people may not realize it. And
one was an authoritarian government who covered it up and mishandled the nuclear reaction or accident, and the other was a freak accident at Fukushima.
Right. And we've learned from that, and now nuclear is a lot safer. It already was safer even with these accidents, but now it's even more safer. There's safety measures implemented. And I'm not a climate scientist. It's not necessarily creating more power than renewables. It just depends on logistically what can happen. Okay. Because actually, solar is now the cheapest way to generate energy. Yep. And it requires the least amount of land if it can, be put on rooftops of buildings that already exist. Something like that. Mm-hmm. Nuclear reactors are big, and they do create a little bit of nuclear waste, so they're not quite renewable or zero waste. Mm-hmm. That said, it's I'm reading this fantastic book called Not the End of the World by Dr. Hannah Ritchie from Our World in Data. And she makes a great point where it's not renewables versus nuclear. It's renewables and nuclear versus fossil fuels.
Right, exactly.
We need all of it. And if we're getting solar, wind, or nuclear, or hydro, or geothermal, or whatever approved, that's not fossil fuels. Great. Like let's keep doing that, and let's just continue to scale that up.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have some listener questions. I think we've covered some of this territory already, but this comes from Brett in Massachusetts via email. That is influencepod69 at gmail.com.
Scared me.
It's all right. that one's a little loud on the soundboard.
It was loud.
Listeners know the noise is coming. But Brett says, I understand the solution to the climate crisis is for governments to make laws and regulations, but sometimes it seems so futile waiting for those changes. We talked about this at the top. In the meantime, what is the single best thing an individual can do to make a difference, especially if a person can't just run out and buy solar panels or an electric vehicle? Because as you said, those costs are coming down, but average person may not be able to spend that money right away. What can we do now in our households or lives?
Sure. This is a common question. What's the best thing I can do? What has the most impact? And there's no single answer. It depends on who you are, where you live, what you do currently. There's a lot of factors. And I'll borrow the words from another fantastic climate communicator, Catherine Hayhoe, when she says there's no silver bullet, it's more of a silver buckshot. And it needs to be a lot of different things happening at the same time. Probably the best thing you can do is get involved in your local community. It's not, like you say, just waiting for government to pass policies. Right. It's us advocating for those policies and demanding and pushing them through and signing petitions and generating support. And it might not necessarily need to be government. It could be your children's school and trying to get them and their board to implement sustainable solutions. It is absolutely holding companies accountable. There's a lot of data on this, but basically 100 companies emit 70% of fossil fuels, and 60 cause 50% of plastic pollution. So let's demand that they do better, and let's vote with our wallet and buy things from companies that are doing better if we can. I understand not everyone's in a situation to necessarily do that, and the available options to us vary a lot, but there's something you can do. You can clean up a local park. You can vote. You can continue learning and educating yourself. Like I mentioned earlier, that's probably the most important thing you can do, because if you don't understand what the right thing to do is, then how can you take it? It's just going to be a gamble, and maybe you'll get it right, maybe you won't. So continue learning, continue talking about it to other people as well, and kind of implementing climate into normal conversation, because it's so interconnected with everything. And watch nature documentaries, read books, listen to podcasts, and just kind of personal choices are important in the sense of like we need a giant societal cultural shift to live a sustainable way. But like you mentioned, it does come from policy, and it comes from companies deciding to do the right thing. And if we as consumers demand it, they'll have to.
One more listener question for you. This is actually a two-part question. This is from Sage in Brooklyn. He asks, what are the kinds of stories that your followers say are most surprising to them? We talked about the most inspiring, but things that your audience is like, whoa, I didn't know that. How could that be? And also, what kinds of stories do people really seem inspired by or want to rally around, especially in a culture of despair and apathy that social media creates? So we did cover some of that. It sounds like the personal stories or the stories about individuals are the inspirational ones, but like, which types of stories are like mind blowers to your audience?
There's two kind of categories. The first is something local to where my audience member lives.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And especially if they didn't know about it. They're like, what? I live here. Like I just reported on a story in San Francisco. There's a completely free grocery store opening up. to help people in need. And thanks to like a bunch of nonprofits and donors. And, people in San Francisco are like, I didn't know that. I live in San Francisco. How was I supposed to know? It's like, well, I'm here for you. I'm telling you, I'm letting you know.
My local news or my social media feed did not serve that story to me because algorithms did not think that it was relevant to my life.
Right.
So
there were zero negative words in that headline. So why would they possibly pump it out? So the local kind of thing, local solutions. And then the other is just something weird and wonky. Like one of my most successful videos was this initiative. It was reported on by The Guardian, and it was basically scientists put speakers in a depleting and dying coral reef to pump sounds of a healthy reef and the clicks and clacks and animals and corals and everything. And just by pumping in that sound, it was up to 7 times more likely for fish and other marine animals to move back to the coral reef.
Right, fascinating.
And that was just like such a cool thing. Everyone wants to protect our coral reefs, and we've heard about bleaching and everything. So to hear such an interesting and somewhat simple solution working is kind of mind-blowing, and people really resonate with those two.
The solutions will come from unexpected places. That's the moral of that story of like, oh, we have to fix the pH and get rid of pollutants. And like, yes, we do. But if we just play sound, then nature will come and do its work in its own way, and that's applying that to other problems is a fascinating discussion.
Totally. And I don't want to downplay probably how complicated it was to figure out. I don't know. I wasn't involved.
It's not
I'm sure scientists are working quite hard and trying a bunch of different things, but it's cool that they're trying some things that are like this, a little bit ridiculous, but they're working.
Yeah. All right. Final question or two here. Given all the work that you do and the research and the content you're putting out, are you personally, Jacob, optimistic that we will get a handle on the climate crisis? And something that a quick personal story as it relates to this question is like, I've always been following climate news and becoming aware of it, but I was always a person who believed that human technological progress moves so quickly. So like, imagine what the world was like 10 years ago. It's almost not recognizable today in terms of the technology that we have. So I'm like, when shit hits the fan, we will find the solutions, and I'm okay. I'm not losing sleep. And then friends of mine on another podcast, as a matter of fact, were like, yeah, you're probably right, but when crops dry up and heat waves hit and hurricanes and whatever, when those things hit impoverished areas, as you alluded to earlier, there will be mass migration and conflict that will eventually spill over. Like the tensions that we feel in the world around borders and immigration, and like those things are at the boiling point, and climate is going to like push them over. And that was the moment I was like, oh shit. I wasn't afraid of climate change in my lifetime and my children's lifetime, and now I am afraid of it. I believe in 100 years, technology will fix it. In 50 years, I'm worried about the political ramifications of climate change. So it's all that to say, that's where I am now. Where do you stand given what you know?
I'm hopeful. Of course. I'm very hopeful. I think
he has to say that. No, I'm just kidding.
It's true. It's how I feel. It's my content. Obviously, I don't just go around talking about only positive stuff, but it is quite authentic to how I feel. And I think, if my dream and goal was to sprout wings and fly away with a pack of eagles, I'd be concerned because there's no way to do that I know of, at least. This stopping climate change is not only achievable, but it's almost like stupidly easy to do at this point. We have the solutions.
Right.
The only missing piece is the collective political will.
Right.
And we got to implement that, and we got to make it as fast as possible. And humans can be hard-headed, but we also pull through. And I think the time scale is kind of the variable. Right. And it's, beyond a shadow of a doubt going to be solved because we have scientists that have outlined exactly how we need it to happen. It's how fast we get it done, which is the variable, and it's not moving fast enough.
Yep.
So that's why I'm working on climate, to make it work faster, to make it go faster, to make it move faster. And same with everyone else that's working on solutions or communicating or anything like that. And if there wasn't any hope, and if it was, a lost cause, then why would we continue doing it?
Yeah, that's great.
Why would scientists continue experimenting with different things and measuring the data if it was a lost cause? And even, these nations that are impoverished, they have a lot more knowledge and ability to be sustainable as well and to be resilient. And rich nations should be and are starting to be responsible for some of that financial aspect. And there are big funds that are being promised to help with adaptation and resilience for these nations that need it the most. The nations that are on coasts and as sea level rises, really going to need our help.
Right.
And rich nations have the ability to do it. We have a lot of money, and we could solve this crisis just with like the US yearly budget. It's just allocating it in the proper way. And maybe climate will be the key that brings humanity together.
But we need more tanks and bombs, Jacob.
Yeah.
We can't afford.
Right. Yeah. That's what I'm always saying. Yeah, we need way more. What are we doing?
The missiles.
Yeah. I think perhaps this can give us a bit more of like a cosmic perspective where we can zoom out and realize that we're all human beings on the same floating rock. And it's our only floating rock that we have. And we have the unprecedented ability to stop this problem in its tracks before it becomes full-fledged. Like that in itself is very hopeful to me. The fact that we have identified this problem and the solutions is miraculous. We are so smart as a species, and I think we can and will absolutely stop climate and reverse. And even if we blow past the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius, we can pull it back as well. We have ways of sucking CO2 out of the air. So it's the urgency that we need to make happen. And that's why I keep making this content. And that's why I keep pushing forward.
Love it. Thanks for zooming out with us. Before I let you go, you're very well followed and influential on Instagram and TikTok, perhaps other places, but I think you recently are starting to invest some time into your YouTube channel. Is that correct?
I am. Yes, it's about to launch.
Oh.
I don't have a hard date,
okay.
But it's basically going to be the same stories I'm talking about, but longer form.
Oh, great.
Because there's a lot of nuance that I'm not able to fit in a minute-long TikTok, Instagram video. Yes. And I think I want to dive a lot more into how these solutions happen and how we get these wins and how people can recreate it.
Yep.
So it's going to be a lot more around that, and the same great stories, just more of them and more in depth.
YouTube has long been a bastion of science communication, like really amazing, as you know, like amazing scientific essays and breakdowns of those types of concepts. And I'm not aware of any, and I'm sure there are like environmental YouTubers, but again, are they sounding alarm bells, or are they being positive, or a mix of both? That is, are you looking at anyone else in that space on YouTube and taking some cues there right now?
There are some fantastic environmental communicators on YouTube, taking very many different approaches. Yeah. Both sounding the alarm bell. Also, like I guess I can name drop a few. Climate Town is fantastic. They talk about different issues and incorporate comedy. I wish I was funnier so I could do the same.
Right. Hey, I'm listening.
Yes, fantastic. Very good. Yeah. Our Changing Climate is a fantastic one to learn and get a deep dive into some of these issues and solutions as well.
Okay.
And yeah, there's like I kind of touched on before, there's so much more need for it. And I think anything related to climate, like let's keep this content coming. And I always try and empower people and be like, you have a unique perspective and you have unique learnings all the time that other people deserve to hear. So if anyone out there is considering making climate content, you absolutely should. Yep. We need you. We need your unique perspective. You have something original to say, and you should say it.
I love that. All right. Links to Jacob Simon's Instagram and TikTok will be in the show notes. And by the time this publishes, if your YouTube channel is up and running, we will link to there as well. You can follow him there. For the long form stuff, Jacob Simon, thank you so much for joining me on Influence. This was a really inspiring conversation.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It was a pleasure. Let's do it again.
I told you it'd be a good one. Thank you again to Jacob Simon, at Jacob Simon Says. You gotta follow him on Instagram and or TikTok. Check out the YouTube channel. Just stop scrolling and stop believing that everything's bad. I know it's hard, but progress is being made on a lot of fronts. So please check out Jacob Simon's channel. Thank you again. Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to the show in 1,000 different ways. You can head on over to the Patreon and subscribe for free if you want to get the show as like a newsletter in your inbox. Email, no algorithms, algorithm free. Subscribe on Patreon or your podcast app of choice, or you could subscribe on YouTube and hit that notification bell, and that makes sure that every time there's a new episode, each Wednesday morning, you will get notified that there's a new one piping hot fresh for you to enjoy. We have some excellent guests coming up. I'm very excited about future episodes. I'm back from vacation, so we will be digging in very shortly. Thank you again for supporting and listening, and I'll talk at you in 1 week's time.